There tends to be a lot of dramatic element in progressive music nowadays.
Yeah.
There used to be a lot more cheerfulness, I think, if you listen to like earlier Yes even, or Tull. Thick as a Brick is really cheerful. A good inspiration for me for that kind of mood setting is Van de Graaff Generator. I always like listening to that when I'm doing this sort of thing, because their use of instrumentation was different than most combos, and the songwriting was definitely different. And the vocals, of course, signature. Doctor Doom, right? It's like, you know, Peter Hamill's persona.
Yeah.
But a great example of like the wide, you know, full spectrum of different moods. Plague of Lighthouse Keepers. It starts kind of somber, and then it picks up and then gets chaotic and goes back and forth, and it ends kind of cheerful. Pawn Hearts,
Yeah.
that's a classic. I love that. There's a time and place for every possible mood. In the early 70s, there was more freedom to explore some of these things. There wasn't so much regimentation as to if you're in a particular genre, you should focus on the key elements of that said genre. Progressive seems to have evolved in that direction, where some of the playfulness is gone. It's been replaced by something a little bit more formulaic. I don't know, I've always tried to get away from that, and of course that sort of puts us in a prog fusion genre. If I look at the inspiration behind the band as an entity, my inspirations were very diverse in the late 60s, early 70s. Prog was not the only thing I listened to. I listened to a lot of pop music, and then I started listening to a lot of fusion. I mean, it wasn't called fusion, it wasn't called prog back then. It just happened to hear about these bands, and you say, well, that's that band, and that's their sound, you know. I mean, how would you categorize Return to Forever or the Mahavishnu Orchestra? Nowadays, you'd say, well, they were early fusion bands. But I mean, back then, they were jazz bands. But I mean, even these guys, you know, whether it was Chick Corea or whether it was John McLaughlin, I mean, they came out of the late 60s jazz scene, and both of them played with Miles. Anybody that played with Miles survived by their improvisational qualities or skills. And that really struck me as a player and as a writer, to be able to create spontaneously something over an unfamiliar or almost unfamiliar theme. So you take prog music, you know, progressive music, and you make it like complex arrangements and time signature changes and all this stuff, almost symphonic in nature, and then you add improvisation to that. Jazz players want it to be more improvisational, play more from the heart. Classical or classically trained players rarely explored that in music, you know. So they were very regimented, and they were very, very much focused on the arrangement and what was written, and being able to technically deliver and emotionally deliver some of the most complex music that was composed. I like the idea of combining the two to get something new. So therefore, that'll probably relegate us to hopefully someday achieve second tier status or something like that, where we won't headline the big festivals, but perhaps we'll play before the headliner or something like that, because of the fact that we're sort of like left of center. So I like that a lot, especially National Health, because there was a certain element of classical music that was thrown in there, complexity in the arrangement. Because one of the things that I don't go towards or gravitate towards in jazz is the repetitive and formulaic approach of jazz composers. They tend to have developed a style of writing which you immediately recognize as jazz, but which is predictable at the same time. Whereas the emphasis is more on the soloing and the improvisation. The song is a little bit simpler in its structure. That's why I take the improvisational part of it and leave that on top, and then I take the jazz part, the arrangement, out from underneath, and I put in the prog, kind of like playing Jenga or something. You take out that piece and you put it back on top, and there's always a balancing act. Absolutely. Every note has to find its place. Another thing about recording that I like is that because we tend to improvise a lot of our solos in the studio when we're making an album or a song or whatever, I don't tend to remember my solos. I just get them good enough so I can jam with the piece, and I get a solo that pleases me and I'm happy with it and so on, and it fits in with the song, and then I forget it. It's on the record, so if anybody wants to hear it, they just put the record on. But if we play live afterwards, I'll improvise something new. I hope that it doesn't disappoint too many people for too many reasons, because I don't like the idea of playing in a live context and just presenting the stuff as it was done in the studio. You know, I mean, there has to be a better reason to perform. Of course, we're trying to sell our product, you know, our CDs or whatever, but there's more to it than that, you know. Some of the people I work with are very regimented that way. If they improvise a solo in the studio, they'll want to play it exactly the same live, or very close to it, you know. It's neither right nor wrong. It's just it's a matter of preference. I prefer not to, but then some of the other guys that I play with prefer to do that. It makes them more comfortable, and ultimately you have to be very comfortable on stage. I, for one, don't mind making mistakes in a live context because it keeps me alive, keeps me interested in what I'm doing, because it's very hard to stay interested in something that you're always doing exactly the same way. But you also have to have a good sense of humor about yourself, because you're almost always going to make mistakes. But that's okay, because, hey, you're human, right? So, you know, you're going to make a mistake, but then it's how you recover from it, or how you hide it, or how you keep going on and stay in the moment, right? You know, just keep going forward, and you go like, you don't stop playing. I've seen people stop playing, you know, they make a bum note or something and they get completely lost. And it's like, hey, guy, keep playing. Then more people are going to notice. I've been performing all my life. I've been most nervous and most uncomfortable when I was attempting to play something totally regimented and totally perfect. And I did not have fun. And I wanted to have fun performing, so I started to add the element of surprise, the element of risk, the element of making a fool of myself, and still being able to do it afterwards, you know. People go see concerts to be entertained. You can take the piss out of yourself, and people will enjoy that if you don't look like you're suffering, you know. If you're just sort of like, ah, yeah, well, hey, you heard that bum note? Check this one out.
Well,
the next solo is going to be twice as fast. I think most people are rather forgiving, and I mean, you know, they don't think, my God, you know, I paid $10 or I paid $50 for this ticket to see this band, and they played 3 bum notes. I mean, there's different attitudes by performers in that regard. You know, I think of the Floyd. I mean, yes, try to be extremely faithful to the originals, more so now actually than before. But a good example of the opposite is the Crimson. The Crimson relies on maybe 40 to 50% improvisation in their concerts. I mean, I would pay money to go see them, and I have done it before, and I will do it again if they come around here, which, who knows, you know. But that is entertainment for me. For me, that's like something I like to see, because you don't know what's going to happen. You pretty much, the only thing you know is that who's going to play. You're not even sure sometimes. And then, but you know that Fripp is going to start the show. Other than that, anything can happen, and there's some brilliant improvisation by the whole band. I mean, it's just like, that's a serious show. But in that regard, I can take any recording of any period of Crimson and enjoy it. You know, a bootleg recording of whatever, you know, the official bootlegs. You can listen to different versions of Easy Money or Lark's Tongues in Aspic. Well, that's a little bit more regimented, that song. But still, there's some differences sometimes. The solo's different. It's all great stuff.